This is a quiet river valley on an October afternoon, gold leaves coming down through the oaks, a slow brown river sliding by below. It looks like nothing ever happened here. But this ground holds one of the hardest stories in Minnesota, a frontier town twice besieged and burned, and a judge who left the bench to command its defense. It holds a lost lake, a German prison camp, and a swimming pool that men quarried out of stone with their hands during the Great Depression. Let us walk down into the Valley of the Cottonwood and find all of it. Flandrau State Park lies in Brown County, in south-central Minnesota, wrapped around a bend of the Cottonwood River just at the southern edge of the city of New Ulm. The park covers about 982 acres, folded into a steep wooded valley about 850 feet above the sea. New Ulm sits a mile north, where the Cottonwood River empties into the larger Minnesota River. 8 miles of trails thread the valley here, some flat along the water, some climbing the oak-covered bluffs. We are starting on the bottomland, close to the river, and we will work our way up. The river that made this place is the Cottonwood. It rises out on the open prairie tablelands to the west and runs east for roughly 70 miles before it reaches New Ulm and gives itself to the Minnesota. It is not a large river. In autumn it runs low and brown over broad sandbars, curling through the trees. But small rivers can dig deep valleys given enough time, and this one has cut a gorge more than 100 feet down into the land. Everything soft and green in this park is here, because the Cottonwood cut this hollow into the plain. To understand why the Cottonwood cuts so deep, you have to look at the river it joins. The valley of the Minnesota River, just north of here, is far too big for the modest stream that flows in it today. That is because it was carved by a monster. At the end of the last ice age, an enormous glacial river called River Warren drained a vast meltwater lake and tore a valley up to 5 miles wide and 250 feet deep across southern Minnesota. When River Warren gouged that great trench, every tributary feeding it, the Cottonwood among them, was suddenly running toward a much lower floor. So the Cottonwood did what water always does. It chased the new low ground. With the master valley of the Minnesota dropped so far below it, the Cottonwood began cutting downward hard, deepening and steepening its own valley to catch up. That is the steep wooded gorge we are walking in now. The high walls on either side, rising 150 to 200 feet, are the measure of how far this little river has sawn down through the land. A big river next door quietly handed a small river the power to carve. Cut down far enough and the river reaches something very old. The bedrock under this part of Minnesota is Cretaceous stone, shale and sandstone and clay, laid down maybe 100 million years ago. Back then, this whole region lay beneath the edge of a warm, shallow inland sea that split North America down the middle. Mud and sand settled on that sea floor and hardened into rock. When the Cottonwood scours its banks after a hard rain, it is cutting into the floor of a vanished ocean, older than the Rocky Mountains, older than anything that ever walked these woods. Over that ancient sea floor, the glaciers spread their own gift. The great ice sheets that ground back and forth across Minnesota left behind a thick blanket of till, a jumble of clay and sand and stray boulders scraped up from the north and dumped here as the ice melted away. That till is the raw soil of the valley, and it is why the slopes are so richly wooded. The river cuts through both stories at once, the deep marine rock below and the loose glacial dirt above. We are walking on the newest layer of a very long book. Down on the valley floor, the cottonwood spreads out and slows, and where a river slows, it drops what it carries. Century after century, the cottonwood has laid down silt and sand across the bottom of its valley, building a flat floodplain and looping itself into wide bends. When the spring melt comes, the river climbs its banks and sheets across that flat, leaving fresh mud behind. This is why the bottomland forest here is so lush and so tall. The trees are drinking from soil. The river renews almost every year. Now the human story, and it begins with a boat full of dreamers. In 1854, a group called the German Land Company of Chicago came up the Minnesota River and founded a town on this spot. They named it New Ulm, after the old cathedral city of Ulm on the Danube in southern Germany. These were German immigrants who wanted more than farmland. They wanted a planned town, wide streets, room for gardens, a place where German language and German culture could take root and grow in the new world. To this day, New Ulm is one of the most thoroughly German towns in America. In 1856, the young settlement was strengthened by a remarkable group, the Turners. The Turner movement had been born in Germany, a society of gymnasts whose motto was sound mind and sound body, and who believed fiercely in universal education, physical fitness, and free thought. A Turner settlement society bought into New Ulm and helped secure its future. The New Ulm Turner Hall, whose oldest section dates to 1873, still stands, the oldest Turner Hall in the entire United States, still used for its original purpose. These were not casual pioneers. They were idealists building a city on a philosophy. Picture what that meant on a raw prairie frontier. While most new towns in the West were rough clusters of saloons and mud, New Ulm had a gymnastics hall, a brass band, singing societies, and a fierce commitment to learning. The Turners gave the town backbone and organization. That same discipline, that habit of banding together and acting as one body, would matter enormously in a few short years. Because the philosophy of sound mind and sound body was about to be tested by fire and gunpowder, in the worst crisis this town would ever face. To tell that crisis honestly, we have to say whose land this was first. This whole river country was the homeland of the Dakota people, who had lived along these valleys for generations. In a series of treaties in the 1850s, the Dakota were pressured to give up nearly all of it and were confined to a narrow strip of reservation along the upper Minnesota River, just west of here. The payments promised in those treaties were late, or skimmed, or never came. By the summer of 1862, the Dakota were starving while food sat locked in traders' warehouses. That is the tinder that lay under this quiet valley. In August of 1862, that tinder caught. The United States-Dakota War broke out along the Minnesota River, a short and terrible conflict born of hunger, broken promises, and years of grievance. Bands of Dakota struck at the agencies, the farms, and the scattered settlements of the valley. Hundreds of settlers were killed in the opening days, and terrified refugees streamed toward the larger towns for shelter. New Ulm, sitting right on the river a few miles from the reservation, stood squarely in the path of the war. The town had almost no soldiers and very little time. The first blow fell on August the 19th. A party of Dakota warriors attacked the edge of New Ulm, burning outlying buildings and driving the townspeople back into a small barricaded core of the town. The citizens threw up hasty defenses out of overturned wagons and whatever they could drag into the streets. They held barely, but everyone understood a larger attack was coming. The town needed a leader, someone with nerve and standing who could pull a mob of frightened farmers and shopkeepers into something like a fighting force. They found him in a judge from the next town over. His name was Charles Eugene Flandrau. He was a lawyer from New York who had come west to Minnesota Territory, and by 1862 he sat as a justice on the young state's Supreme Court. When word of the attacks reached him in the town of St. Peter, he did not wait for orders. He raised a company of volunteers and marched to the sound of the guns, arriving in New Ulm ahead of the second assault. The people of the threatened town elected this judge, with no formal military training, as the commander of their defense. He accepted, and he set about getting them ready. The Second Battle of New Ulm came on August the 23rd. This time, more than 600 Dakota warriors advanced on the town under experienced leaders. They used the buildings on the edges as cover and set them alight, and the fighting raged street by street through smoke and flame. Flandrau's ragged defenders, farmers and clerks and turners with hunting rifles, held the barricaded center through a long and desperate day. At one critical moment, Flandrau himself led a charge to drive attackers out of a threatening position. When darkness fell, the town, battered and burning, was still in its defenders' hands. But holding the center had cost nearly everything else. Much of New Ulm was in ashes, more than 100 buildings burned, food and shelter running out, and hundreds of wounded to care for. 2 days later, on August the 25th, Flandrau made the hard choice and ordered the town evacuated. A long wagon train of some 2,000 people rolled out across the prairie toward safety at Mankato, leaving their smoldering city behind. It was a retreat, but it was an orderly one, and it saved the people. The town they left would be rebuilt, stubbornly on the same ground. Charles Flandrau lived a long and full life beyond that smoke-filled August. Born in 1828, he had helped write Minnesota's state constitution, served on its territorial council, and sat on its highest court before the war ever began. After the fighting, the governor put him in charge of defending the whole southwestern frontier, a duty he carried at the rank of colonel. He went back to the law, wrote histories of the state he helped build, and died in 1903, remembered above all for the days he stood in the streets of a burning New Ulm. a judge who became, for 1 week, a soldier. Now walk forward 80 years to this valley. When the state of Minnesota built a park here on the Cottonwood, it was first called simply Cottonwood River State Park. But in 1945, the state renamed it, and it chose to honor the judge who had defended the town just up the river. That is why these trails carry the name Flandrau. Every map, every sign in this valley quietly points back to 1862, to the man on the barricades. The land remembers by the name it wears. And the park itself has a Depression-era story, every bit as human as the war. The park was born out of hard times. In the 1930s, the Great Depression threw millions of Americans out of work, and the federal government answered with the New Deal, a sweep of programs that paid idle men to build public things. 2 of those programs came to this valley on the Cottonwood, the Works Progress Administration and the Civilian Conservation Corps. The idea was simple and humane. Give a man a wage and a shovel, and let him build something that would outlast the hard times. What they came here to build was a park, a lake, and a place for ordinary families to swim. The first workers arrived in the autumn of 1934, and they arrived to nothing. They lived in tents through a Minnesota winter while they built themselves bunkhouses, a mess hall, and an office. These were mostly older, skilled men, stonemasons and carpenters, hired through the Works Progress Administration. In June of 1935, a second crew came, younger men of the Civilian Conservation Corps, who set up their own camp in the southwest corner of the park. Together, tent by tent and stone by stone, they began turning this raw valley into a place built to last. The stone that built this park did not come from a store. The men quarried it right here, cutting rough blocks out of the valley's own bedrock and hauling them to the building sites. It was brutal work done mostly by hand, with picks and bars and sweat, in the heat of summer and the cold of winter. But it gave the building something you cannot buy, a stone that belongs to this exact ground. When you lay your hand on one of these walls, you are touching the Cottonwood Valley itself, shaped by men who needed the work and took pride in it anyway. The buildings they raised are the treasure of this park. They were designed in the rustic style favored by the National Park Service, low and heavy and married to the land, with thick stone walls and rugged timber. But the architect, Edward Barber, did something unusual. To honor the German town just up the river, he shaped these buildings to echo old Germany, with steeply pitched roofs, dormers, tall chimneys, casement windows set with small panes, and fine, irregular stonework. The result is a handful of structures found nowhere else, part American Park Lodge, part German village, all built by hand in the teeth of the Depression. The heart of it all was a place to swim. The crews built a handsome stone beach house to serve a broad sand-bottomed swimming area, a spot for the families of New Ulm to escape the summer heat. That tradition never died. Flandrau still keeps a large sand-bottomed swimming pond, fed and filtered, one of very few of its kind left in the whole state park system. Children still run across warm sand into cool water on this exact ground, just as the men who built it hoped they would, generation after generation, for nearly 90 years now. To feed that swimming beach, the workers built a dam across the Cottonwood River. Completed in 1937 after 2 hard years of labor, the dam held back the river into a reservoir of about 209 acres, a proper lake where before there had been only a stream. For a while it was the centerpiece of the park, a broad sheet of water for swimming and boating below the bluffs. But the Cottonwood is a prairie river, and prairie rivers flood. The dam that took 2 years to build would spend the rest of its life fighting the very water it was meant to hold. Flood after flood battered the dam over the decades, tearing at it, filling the reservoir with silt, demanding endless repair. Finally, in 1995, the state gave up the fight and removed the dam altogether, and something quietly wonderful happened. The Cottonwood, penned for nearly 60 years, went back to being a river. It found its old channel, rebuilt its sandbars, and started again to flood and feed its own floodplain the way it had for 10,000 years. The lake is gone, but the river we are walking beside is alive and free, and in a way that is the greater thing. Tucked in one corner of the park, the Depression crews built something else, a group camp, a cluster of sturdy bunkhouses and a kitchen shelter of stone and timber, meant to host large groups of children and families in the woods. It is a small village of its own, low buildings among the trees, built to the same handsome German rustic pattern as the rest. For decades, summer campers filled it. But during the Second World War, these same peaceful bunkhouses were pressed into a very different and far grimmer service, one that ties this valley straight back to the old country New Ulm came from. During the war, the group camp became Camp New Ulm, a prisoner of war camp holding around 160 captured German servicemen. It was one of many such camps scattered across the American heartland, where prisoners were put to work on the short-handed farms and canneries of the region. There was a strange gentleness to it here. In a town where so many people still spoke German and carried German names, the prisoners found a community that understood their language and, quietly, their homesickness. German soldiers, held captive in a German-American town, in bunkhouses built by unemployed Americans. The valley keeps folding history back on itself. Set the human stories down for a moment and look at the living forest. The valley floor here is classic floodplain forest, the kind of rich, wet woodland that grows where a river regularly overflows. The big trees of the bottom are willows and eastern cottonwoods, tall silver maples, American elms, and green ash, their roots content in soil that floods each spring. In autumn, the cottonwoods and maples turn the whole valley bottom to yellow and gold. It is a forest shaped entirely by water, thriving on the very floods that destroyed the dam, exactly where the river wants it to be. Walking these bottoms in October is a gift. The light comes down through thinning yellow leaves, the river murmurs off to the side, and the ground is soft with a season's fall. Old oxbows, cut-off bends of the cottonwood, sit as still marshy ponds among the trees, slowly filling in. Deer move through the underbrush, and the tracks of raccoon and beaver print the mud at the water's edge. This is the quietest, richest part of the park, the deep green heart of the valley, and it exists only because a river is allowed to misbehave here every spring. Lift your eyes from the wet bottoms to the steep valley walls, and the forest changes completely. The cool, moist north-facing slopes grow a northern hardwood forest of sugar maple, basswood, and hackberry. But the dry, sun-baked south-facing slopes tell another story. There the trees thin out into oak savanna and open goat prairie, patches of prairie grass and wildflowers clinging to slopes too steep and dry for a closed forest. Rare plants like the small white lady's slipper survive on these bluffs. In a single short climb, you can walk from wet river, jungle up into dry prairie. And in the middle of October, all of it turns. The bur oaks on the dry bluffs go deep bronze and russet. The maples and basswoods flare orange and gold. Down in the bottoms, the cottonwoods throw off showers of yellow leaves onto the slow brown river. The whole valley, from the prairie rim to the water's edge, blazes for a few short weeks before the cold comes. This is the Cottonwood Valley at its most beautiful, the reward for every flood and every hard winter, a river gorge lit like a lantern under a low autumn sun. For all its history, this is a living, working piece of wild country. Naturalists count around 25 species of mammals in the park: white-tailed deer and coyotes and gray foxes, beavers and raccoons and mink along the water. More than 160 species of birds have been recorded moving through the valley, following the river as a green highway across the farmed prairie. In autumn, the migrants pour through, using this ribbon of forest for food and shelter. Flandrau is not a museum of old battles. It is a corridor of life threading a landscape that people otherwise plowed. So this is Flandrau, a single wooded valley that holds an entire world. A river that chased a vanished glacial flood down to a Cretaceous Sea floor. A German idealist town, twice besieged and burned, saved by a judge who came down from the bench to fight. A park quarried out of stone by desperate men in the Great Depression. A lost lake. A river set free again, and a forest that turns to fire every October. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.